A lot of writers will start a book, but very few will ever finish. What happens to those writers in that process? Well, I can tell you from personal experience that starting a book is the toughest part of writing. A lot of people have great ideas for a book, but during that time when they have to put fingers to the keyboard, they wind up being stuck and frustrated. And because they wind up stuck and frustrated, they just wind up giving up instead of persevering. What a lot of people don't understand about writing a book is that there's a process in the beginning where you're trying to take these ideas from your imagination to translating it to words on a page. And in that beginning process, you have a lot of ideas running in your mind, and you want to try to put them all on a page. And oftentimes, in that process, all those work trying to turn those pictures into words can be a bit of a challenge, especially for the first two or three chapters. And it's those first two or three chapters that pretty much set the tone for the book, establish the main character for the book, establish what the main character wants to accomplish, establishes the obstacles that the main character have to face, and pretty much lay out the foundation for the book. And a lot of writers at that point become very frustrated because they're trying to organize their thoughts for putting those words on a page in those first two or three chapters and trying to get them exactly right. And it's a real challenge at that point because you're just getting started. And when you're just getting started, again, you have all these thoughts running in your head for what you want to put on the page. And that first chapter, it may come out right, but then the second chapter, where you're trying to establish, things like a contrast or the primary conflict, those can get a little jumbled. And then what happens is in that second and third chapter, this is when a lot of writers start getting a little frustrated. They start getting a little angry because they can't get their thoughts from their head to translate onto that page. And then what happens is it becomes an endless cycle of revision of those first two or three chapters. And that prevents them from persevering and continuing to move forward. Now, I've run into this situation a couple of times in my writing career. I remember when I was writing Spinsterella last year, this happened to me. I started on the first two or three chapters, and I almost got caught up in a revision cycle, and then I just decided I would put the book away for a second and then go work on some other projects like Isis, Bride of Dracula, or Isis, Imitation of Life, and I decided to work on those stories. And then later on, about February or January 2015, I got inspired, and I started writing Spinsterella at full speed, and I was able to get through the entire book by about May or June. So when I put that book, when I left it alone and I let myself rest, I was able to come back to the ideas fresh. Because what I find is, if you get too close to a story and you're trying to put all these ideas down on paper too fast, what happens is your brain winds up becoming overwhelmed, and you can't really think in a way to put the words on the page. Because when it comes down to writing, you really have to have a clear mind in order to see the pictures in your head to turn them into words. And it's a major challenge to do that. And if you're, getting stuck sometimes, it's because you have too many ideas going on and you just need to take a minute to go rest and leave that idea alone for a while, because sometimes it's just not ready to be taken to the page. And a lot of writers, what they do is they try to keep revising that part, and what happens is they wind up not going anywhere. You not wind up building any momentum, because when you're writing a book, it's all about trying to get to that finish line. And a lot of writers, they wind up getting, instead of taking that break to get to the finish line, because this is a marathon, this is not a sprint. And a lot of writers, they try to sprint in the beginning to try to get to the ending. And yeah, you can do that on certain stories where you feel really inspired, and I've done that on certain stories I've felt inspired about. But in a lot of cases, I've had to take those breaks and just let that story sit for a second until I could come back at it fresh. The whole thing is that those first three chapters are the toughest ones, and starting a book is really tough. It's the toughest part of writing altogether, because you have to sit down again and organize all those thoughts you have in your head for this story, and then try to translate it to words on a keyboard. Because we can see these images in our head as writers. We see these images in our head clearly as pictures in our imagination. But turning those pictures into words that a reader can understand, that's the tough part. And when you're on those first three chapters, that you pretty much will wind up, at points where you're feeling stuck or a little stalled, and that can deter you if you don't know how to persevere. And what you have to do and understand is that you, at this point in the beginning, you are going to get stuck because you're just trying to sort out everything. And when you're trying to sort it out, it takes time. And then what happens is, the first three chapters might be a little jumbly. They might even be, a little rambly, because I had that happen with the book I just finished, which was Spellbound, which is the Spinsterella prequel. And the first three chapters, I wound up, after I wrote the entire first draft of it, I wound up going all over those chapters all over again and pretty much revising quite a few of them so I could clarify some of the details so the reader could get a clearer picture. Because oftentimes those first three chapters are going to be, a little off, and they're not going to be perfect. But in the revision process, you can pretty much clean them up once you finish to the end. And what I find is, once you break past a certain point in the story, and like I say, the first plot point or the second plot point, oftentimes the story gets easier to write, especially when you get towards the climax point or the conclusion point. That's when the story pretty much starts coming together and starts to gel together. And once you hit that point, you can go back and try to and revise the beginning, because by that point of the first plot point or the second plot point, you've pretty much laid out all the things that you wanted to lay out, and you've pretty much gotten through where you wanted to go, and then you can just look at it and go, or from a broader perspective, and say, oh, this is the main character, this is what they really wanted, and this is the obstacles that they had to face, and this is why we should carry out. And when I look at the later part of it, like I did with Spellbound just recently, I saw how everything just kind of came together. I saw how the entire story came together in the big picture. But the whole thing is when you're trying to write a story, you just can't let yourself get discouraged in the beginning, because the beginning is the toughest part. You have to focus on getting towards the end, because once you get towards the end, then you can take another look at the beginning and see where you want it to go and see if it's going right. And once you get there, then you can pretty much at that stage you can start revising. And this is what I see with a lot of writers, is that they start losing their confidence because the story isn't coming together in the beginning. But what happens is that you have to understand that it's nothing wrong with you. It's just that the story, you need time to get this story together in your mind so you can organize it and take it apart and put it on paper, because translating those pictures into words is a challenge. And right now you're just trying to take those sketchy ideas out of your head, or those pictures out of your head, and turn them into words that everyone can understand. And people may not see the picture in the beginning because you don't really see the picture in the beginning, but once you get to the end, you can see the complete picture of what this story is all about. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.